You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.
Mindy Kaling is being cancelled. That's the text message that I got from a friend who's all across pop culture last week, and I was a bit confused about it, to be honest, because Mindy Kaling, in case you're drawing a blank on that name, she's one of the most powerful and celebrated women in Hollywood, and I couldn't imagine why she would be being cancelled. A bit of background on Mindy. She was born in America, but her parents are of Indian descent. And here's a little bit of what she had to say on Meghan Markle's podcast, Archetypes, about her upbringing.
I grew up dark-skinned Indian girl, overweight, glasses, in lily-white suburbs of Boston, never thinking I was attractive. And I think a feeling of belonging was if a man deigns to make you their girlfriend.
So Mindy Kaling is one of those rare people, and even rarer women in Hollywood, because she can make things happen. And that's due to the respect she's earned in the industry, not just because of her talent in front of the camera as an actor and a comedian, but also behind it, because she's a screenwriter and a producer and a showrunner of lots of shows that always feature women of colour. And so as a woman of colour herself, what she's done for the representation of people of Indian descent cannot be understated. Not just when she's acting, like she did on The Office and on her own sitcom, The Mindy Project, but also when she's a screenwriter or a producer on, well, any project really, because she always makes sure there's an Indian American character in the stories that she tells, like in The Sex Lives of College Girls, or Never Have I Ever, or the recent animated adaptation of Scooby Doo you might have heard about, called Velma.
My name is Velma Dinkley, and this is my origin story.
Where the character of Velma has been reimagined by Mindy and the creators of that show as a woman of South Asian descent and is voiced by Mindy herself. So all of this brings us to her cancellation, particularly Velma, which is why this story is in the news at the moment. What might surprise you the most if you are not intimately across Mindy Kaling, and what surprised me when I read a bit about it, is that she's being criticised because of the way that she depicts women of Indian descent, despite being a woman of Indian descent herself, and also that the criticism is coming from other women who share her background. Her critics say that by using some of the themes and the tropes that others use to denigrate South Asian women, like her characters joking about their body hair, or one of her characters describing herself as being an Indian loser, they say that this just reinforces those negative stereotypes and that, I guess in short, she's doing harm to the women that she's trying to represent. I know it's quite a lot to wrap your head around, but it is a fascinating issue to unpack, and I really wanted to understand that better. So I invited two women into the studio who know more about Mindy Kaling than most, and who each have a unique perspective on this story. My recollection of Velma is that she was the kind of nerdy one. There were the two really pretty ones. I forget what they were called.
Fred and Daphne.
Were there two girls or one?
Daphne and Velma, yeah.
Daphne, and Velma. So she was Emily Vernem is 26. She's a writer and she also heads up our audience development team here at Mamamia. She grew up in Australia and like Mindy, Em is of Indian descent and considers Mindy to be hugely influential to her personally and also to pop culture. Laura Brodnik is our head of entertainment and she hosts our daily pop culture podcast, The Spill. And she knows everything about everything, really. And on the same day that I got this text message from my friend, I overheard Em and Laura talking about this issue in the kitchen here at Mamamia. And so I forced them to abandon their work and join me in the studio to answer my pressing questions. This is no filter, by the way. I'm glad you're here, and it was rude of me not to introduce myself earlier. I'm Mia Freedman, and it's my first episode back behind the mic for a little while, so I'm a bit rusty. What could possibly go wrong? The conversation that you're about to hear is not about whether or not Mindy Kaling should be cancelled. I believe that whole idea is reductive and unhelpful, and so do my guests. This episode is about hearing some different points of view and getting some fresh perspectives. Let's do this. When did you first become aware of Mindy Kaling?
Oh, very, very young. I think she was probably the catalyst for my own humour and probably my writing as well when I started writing here at Mamamia. So this whole thing about cancelling her makes me so not even upset but more scared because it feels like I have to now cancel myself. It feels like I have the weight of every Indian woman who's listening to this podcast on my shoulders.
Well, you do.
It's scary because I'm just scared that I'm disappointing a huge group of women who hate Mindy Kaling and feel like they don't hear their opinions heard and they don't have a platform and I do and I'm not voicing their opinion.
Well, don't worry. You don't have to be representative of anybody other than yourself. So from what I understand, the reason that she's in the news is because of a new show that she's part of called Velma.
My name is Velma Dinkley, and this is my origin story.
Laura, can you explain to us what Velma is and what Mindy Kaling's involvement is?
Yeah, so it's taking the iconic characters from Scooby Doo, from the comics, the TV series, the movies, making them a bit more adult, making them less child-friendly, and also doing some race swapping in there. So with the character of Velma being of Indian descent and Mindy Kaling's voicing her and has also, written the script, the production. When she's on a project, she tends to do all facets of it. And so the reaction's very much to some of the dialogue that Velma says throughout the series.
Okay. So she's reinvented it. She's made this character kind of the hero in the center of this animated series, and she's made her a woman of Indian descent. Mm-hmm. So tell me what the problem is.
I think it's because with the original Scooby Doo, you always had Velma being a bit of the nerdy, smart one, the loser, as, some people have called her, and Daphne being the pretty hot girl. And they've taken those stereotypes in this new series and blown them out, whereas Daphne is still the hot, popular girl, but they're not friends. And Velma is, in her own words, an Indian loser, or a loser in the school who's trying to get Fred to fall in love with her. But a lot of the jokes are about her heritage and her looks, and she's making them about herself, she's trying to be self-deprecating in the series. But I think it's because this is just one of many times that Mindy Kaling has written like this, that people are kind of really attaching themselves to Velma. Also, it had one of the lowest scores ever for an animated series in terms of audience and critics. So people hate the show overall. I think if they'd liked it, we might have been having a different conversation. But because it's been panned, all that hatred now is just centering on Mindy Kaling.
Let's listen to one of the lines in the show that have been particularly called out by people who are upset. This is Mindy as Velma being interrogated by two detectives.
Clearly, someone's trying to frame me. And I wasn't lurking. I was waiting to shower alone.
Because of your weight?
What? No.
Because of your handsome face?
My face is fine.
Because of your hairy gorilla arm?
No.
Okay, so as a woman of Indian descent yourself, born here in Australia, what are your vibes?
If you are a big fan of Mindy Kaling, I think you would know that she pretty much created Velma based off her and her lived experiences, which is what she does with pretty much every character she creates in the Mindy Project, in Never Have I Ever, in Sex Lives of College Girls, and now with Velma. I think the issue is that Velma was a character that was recreated, which is why everyone hates it so much, because they're saying she went too far, it's too edgy, too much is happening. And I think that happens with any childhood show that someone just recreates. So even when people recreate a childhood show that's pretty much the same, people will still get mad.
From what I understand, she's copying it from both the right and the left. And I think this is something that has been a bit of a theme where the right are critical and say, it's too woke. Why does Velma have to be a woman of colour? Why does it have to be edgy? Why can't it be the same as it always is? And why can't everybody be white? Because that's the way it's always been. And then the left are criticising her, saying the character who is Velma is critical of herself and insults herself as an Indian woman or as a woman of Indian descent. So you're a Mindy fan, I know.
Yes, I am a Mindy fan. I sit kind of nowhere on that scale. I think when the first poster came out for Velma, and it was pretty obvious Velma was redone as a South Asian woman, that was the only time when the right was super angry, because I just saw a photo of a brown woman and they're like, we hate this. And it's only when the series started and the content started coming out that the left were also like, we hate this. I read a tweet where someone said, this is the first time the right and left have agreed on something. And that makes me feel really weird, because I think that was a reason why this has amplified so much. As we know, Twitter is a cesspit and it's horrible and it breeds horrible language. And I think people forget that when you tweet, you feel like that everyone who is liking your tweet and retweeting your tweet agrees with you and your values. But with the case of this, it seems like people who are on the left are probably saying something like, she doesn't represent me. And then they're getting all these likes and retweets, probably from people on the right who just don't want to see a brown woman. And it's just breeding this really disgusting culture of people who actually don't have the same values thinking that they agree with each other.
I'm interested to know, as a young woman of colour growing up in Australia, you actually wrote something amazing for Mamamia, which was incredibly moving. I want to get you to read a little bit of it now. Now, the piece you wrote was called, "At 17, finding a skin lightening product was one of the happiest moments of my life." Do you remember what was happening at the time that you wrote this that made you pitch it as a story idea?
It was in 2020. I remember there was a brand, a skin lightening product brand that was coming under scrutiny for like having the product in itself. And my opinion was a bit controversial because I thought, why aren't we not allowed to have skin lightening products when tanning products are so prevalent in the beauty industry?
Can you just read a little bit of what you wrote?
Although I have no memory of being outright bullied for the colour of my skin, the concept of white skin equating to beauty was something that I had internalized from a very young age. These are just a few instances that fueled my belief that brown was ugly and white was beautiful. And I tried my hardest to make myself look beautiful. From covering myself with a towel when I went to the beach with friends, to purposely not wearing sunscreen as I heard a rumour that it can make you darker, to wearing makeup that was 3 shades lighter than my actual skin tone, to hiding my tan lines from friends who would say, "I didn't know you could go darker," or "You're so lucky that you can tan." I was 17 years old when I realised I might actually have a choice. On a family holiday in India, my parents and I were in a massive grocery store in Mumbai when the skin products aisle caught my eye. Particularly one product which took up the entire section. It was an internationally known brand. Their products are all over Australia in pharmacies, on television commercials, and even recommended by many beauty influencers. But it was a product that I had never heard of before. A cream that promised a lighter skin tone by 3 to 4 shades. 3 to 4 shades. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. This product could quite literally change my life. If I'm honest, finding that product was one of the happiest moments of my life. It proved to me that I wasn't the only brown girl unhappy in her skin. It proved to me that everything I was doing to try to lighten the colour of my skin was the right thing to do. And most importantly, it proved to me that the whiter you are, the more beautiful you are.
When you think about that now, how old are you now?
I am nearly going to be 27.
So that's almost 10 years ago.
Yeah.
How has your view of that changed over 10 years? Or maybe it hasn't.
It is a hard one. I think it's one of those things that every day it's a bit different. It's like every day I'm either like really happy for being who I am and the colour of my skin, and then some days I'm not. But I think in the 10 years when I've really kind of gone through puberty, matured a bit, surrounded myself with amazing people, that it helped me kind of see, similar to Mindy Kaling actually, it helped me kind of see the humour in what it's like to have those kind of thoughts as a young girl. I think it's so easy to go, because I do suffer from depression, and so easy to go back into that depressive state of feeling so sorry for who I was back then and not appreciating myself. But then I also remember that at that age, I was still like having such a good time. Like I really did love my life. And kind of using the rhetoric of wanting to lighten your skin and even like trying to fake tan to see what it was like. I think there is just something weirdly, sadly funny in wanting to just pretend that everything would always be okay. And it is okay.
When you see those kinds of experiences reflected in the art that Mindy Kaling makes through the lens of humour,
yes,
invariably, either herself or through one of the characters that she's written or in a show that she's producing, how does it make you feel?
I feel very seen. Yeah, the characters she writes about herself are very, very close to how I was brought up as like an Indian woman living and being born in a Western society. So it makes me really sad when I see this outcry of her getting cancelled because you're cancelling her lived experiences. And I think it's very unfair that she has to also talk about other people's lived experiences that she has no experience in living, pretty much. And it's something that I also feel very, very nervous about when I write about things like this. I remember even writing this piece and thinking, like, Indian women are going to hate me for writing this because it's going to just push us back 100 years of the work that so many amazing women have tried to kind of squash. And I feel like even doing this podcast, those kind of feelings are coming up again. But I don't know. It just makes me really sad, and it makes me feel like I have to relook at everything I've done in the past and change it for the future when that's not really what I want to do.
After the break, Emily talks about how Mindy representing a different side of being of Indian descent, and particularly her humour, actually makes her feel really seen. Laura, I want to ask you about this idea of people who are the first in entertainment. So Mindy Kaling, Shonda Rhimes has held a similar role in terms of being a real pioneer, a woman of colour who is in a position of power in Hollywood. How unusual is that?
I mean, super unusual. Even now, like, we talk about a lot of things changing behind the scenes, but if you can still only really name 2 women of colour who have the power to, there's lots of women working behind the scenes, but there's very few women that have their name on the billboard or can get a project greenlit just because they say they want to make it. And Mindy Kaling and Shonda Rhimes are the 2 women in that mix. And so for Mindy Kaling, I think that because she was the first woman of Indian descent to make a show like this and to write those books and to be on screen, there's pressure on her to speak for all Indian women, even though she's come out many times saying, I kind of just wanted to make a nice rom-com, and sometimes I also want to fall in love with a shitty guy.
Laura, I want to ask you about, without wanting to revert to this idea of woke, because I know that can be a bit of a trite word sometimes, it seems like there is this lack of distinction between art and what should be. So what an individual's experience might want to be, or the experience they want to portray, and how the world should work. Are you noticing that?
Yeah, a little bit more now so in terms of the projects that are coming out, especially if you're someone who is seen as a bit more bankable because you can tell a story other people aren't able to tell. Because no one's going to criticize someone like an Adam Sandler or even a Tina Fey who do the same thing, or a Pete Davidson who just tell their own story about their life over and over again through multiple characters. No one's going to say, well, stop portraying loser white guys. Whereas Mindy Kaling's got a bit more of a burden to bear in that sense.
Because there's a history, of course, of marginalized groups being represented in negative ways. So there's this kind of idea that when you've got a seat at the table, it's your responsibility as someone from a marginalized group to portray a very positive, aspirational version of your community. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. I think what's happened with Velma that's kind of blown this conversation out is that we were having these conversations a little bit around when the Mindy project came out, and even a little bit when Never Have I Ever came out. But it's more so now because people think that she's reverting to a lazy idea that she's already put out into the world, and that they're not looking for a TV show from her anymore. Like, no one's looking at Mindy Kaling now for a show they're just going to enjoy. They're looking at her to take the conversation further, which I think is kind of interesting. And in a way, I'm not on the cancelling Mindy Kaling train at all, but I do understand the women who are saying this message felt important and made us feel seen when we'd never seen it before, but now that you've hit us over the head with it multiple times, it's not feeling like you're breaking the mold, it's feeling like you don't have anything left to say, which I think is the heart of the criticism. Like I said, if Velma had been really well received, I think this would be a different conversation.
Right, so it almost goes from making you feel seen, to reinforcing a negative stereotype.
Yeah, I would say so. I think out of all of this, I'm one of the lucky ones who do feel seen through the characters that Mindy portrays. But on the other hand, I can imagine how hurtful and disappointing it would be to have the one Indian woman in Hollywood not tell your own story, like seeing someone who looks exactly like you on TV and that character is so far from your truth. It must be so disheartening to see that happen as well.
So how do you think it would feel if Mindy Kaling, because it's confusing, isn't it? It's like there are some people who want her to behave as though her appearance and her heritage has no impact on her life or only a positive impact on her life.
Yeah.
And then would that make you feel seen?
No, because that's not the truth.
Yeah.
And anyone who I feel like I know has grown up with the same upbringing as me in my family, like it hasn't been easy. It hasn't been positive the whole time. It hasn't been like a fun ride. And I would feel honestly disappointed if that was the only thing I was shown in Hollywood, that it's so great and easy and fun to be Indian being brought up in a Western society, because it's not. It's like hardship as well. And sometimes some people like me and Mindy, the only way we push through that is through humor, and self-degrading humor especially.
Yeah, because the humor, if you're the one telling the joke, you've got the power.
Yes.
Correct?
Yeah, it's the idea of not punching down in comedy, which I think she subscribes to, like especially in the Mindy Project. So many of the jokes are at her own expense, her family, her brothers parodied, her parents, their relationship. And that's kind of where she tries to bring in the humor of saying, like, I used to say these dumb things about being Indian. I don't believe them now. There's even a whole episode where she meets an Indian guy and she wants to date him. And he's like, you don't have any other Indian friends? That's so embarrassing. And they kind of explore how she's trying to be a white woman and she kind of doesn't want to make any apology for that. And I feel like that was very much Mindy Kaling trying to tell that side of her story through a funny character.
Being Indian is a really important part of my life. More than CrossFit even. And I need it to be important to the person I date.
Are you saying I'm not Indian enough for you?
Mindy, I think you're really nice. Scratch that, I think you're really uninhibited. But I don't think I can date a...
Pescatarian? I made that all up. I hate fish. I eat meat all the time.
No, I don't think I can date a coconut.
Is it because I'm covered in tiny hairs and I fall out of trees? That's mean.
No, because you're brown on the outside and white on the inside.
We've been talking about Mindy and about this issue specifically, but one of the reasons I wanted to include you in this conversation, Laura, apart from the fact that you're an encyclopedia of pop culture knowledge and one of the funniest women I know, is that this really reminded me of the conversation around Rebel Wilson, because as a woman who was plus size and, again, a marginalised group and an underrepresented group in Hollywood, what were some of the criticisms that she faced before she lost a lot of weight?
In a way, yeah, it's different to the Mindy situation, but you're right, the way we talk about it and the way people feel about it, there's a lot of similarities there. And one of them was that she was the only plus-size woman at the table when it came to starring in these big studio movies and being a producer and being a director. And she did the same thing that Mindy does in a way, that she looked at her life and things that people had said to her and things that she felt bad about and really broadened them out into comedy. But the backlash came for her, and this is where I can kind of really, I mean, obviously I'm a white woman, so it's a different situation, but the backlash for how she ended up becoming a caricature of only the negative sides is where I really side with the people who are seeing that in Mindy Kaling as well, because then it gets to the point with Rebel where she was only showing the worst parts of being a plus-size woman in terms of being lazy, being a bit slow.
Can you remind us of some of those characters?
I mean, there's the Pitch Perfect series, there's like Isn't It Romantic, all those kind of
and
movies.
For those who haven't seen them, what did she play? I mean, I remember her in, what was the movie with Kristen? Oh, Bridesmaids. She was the flatmate of Kristen Wiig's character.
Yes.
And she was called Fat Amy, wasn't she?
Yes.
Or is that in
she was
Pitch
called
Perfect?
Fat Amy in Pitch Perfect in all three movies.
Love it.
What's your name?
Fat Amy.
You call yourself Fat Amy?
Yeah, so twig bitches like you don't do it behind my back.
She played the bumbling, silly sidekick roommate in Bridesmaids as well. And it's a character that she perfected back in her very early improv days and then wove into every project, which again isn't a bad thing. A lot of the comedy greats, and I say greats in terms of like people who can open blockbuster movies like a Will Ferrell or an Adam Sandler, those kind of actors, they do the same thing. And, you know, David Spade, where back in the days of when SNL was big and then that being the launching pad for movies, they would always create one character and weave it through all of their projects. And so Rebel Wilson was very old school in her thinking of, I'll just create this one character based off being a plus size woman, based on all the funny elements around that, taking all the jokes about society and blowing them out, but I'm the one telling them, so I'm in control. But then it got to the stage where I understand the criticism because it was very much pushing out that stereotype and making it feel like I don't feel good seeing a plus size woman in this movie. It doesn't make me feel seen because she's the butt of the joke again, which I can kind of understand how people, especially women of Indian descent, watching Mindy Kaling in Velma and just thinking, like I'm still the butt of the joke even now, and that's all there is for me. And so I kind of feel like even though it's not about Mindy Kaling, I think for Rebel and Mindy, it's unfair that the pressure is on them so much more than any other creator. But at the end of the day, when you're the only one at the table, everyone's looking at you more so, and that's unfair, but it's just realistic.
You know, Em, you've spoken about this idea of you can't be what you can't see.
Yeah.
How has Mindy Kaling, and are there other Mindys? Are there other examples of Mindys in the culture that have been meaningful to you?
Oh, no. Not personally. And I feel like it's really crappy to have to source them myself when everyone else just gets presented their idols on a silver platter, and South Asian women and people who are from marginalized communities are having to go and search for these people. I think it's a huge industry problem that Laura pointed out. And it's also bringing it back to holding opinions for certain things. You feel like you have to hold everyone's opinion who is from the same culture as you. And if you don't, you're disappointing them, therefore disappointing yourself, because you feel like you're ostracizing yourself from your entire community. And it sucks that we always have to do the proactive work where everyone else can just sit back and chill and ask for our opinions, and making sure that our opinions are their sources of truth when they're not actively looking themselves.
Do you mean like I'm doing now?
Yeah, exactly. It's a call out. No, not like this. When I was prepping for this episode, I was thinking of what I wanted the listener to come out of, and I was so scared that listeners, especially Caucasian women or women who aren't from Indian descent, will come out of this using my opinion of not cancelling Mindy Kaling as an excuse of them liking Mindy Kaling, even though that she has upset a large demographic of the Indian community. And I don't want them to use my opinion as their source of truth.
Great call. I think it's interesting, it's when people expect all of women to think a certain way, or all of plus people to think a certain way. Before we wrap up, I just want you to both share some of your favourite Mindy Kaling moments or bits, some of the things that she's done that you've loved the most.
Oh my God, there's
so many.
It's so hard I know you're both big fans.
We should
which
just
is why
script the whole, read out a script of the whole episode.
I know. This woman has brought me so much joy. Just every scene from her book in terms of her book is brilliant. I mean, when she was presenting the Emmys and didn't get one and went to the McDonald's car park and put track pants on under her gown, had a cheeseburger and was like, okay, got to get back to work. You know, those kind of moments. Her writing is so funny and so sharp. And even in her other shows that haven't depicted her life, like 4 Weddings and a Funeral, that's a brilliant series. And her cultivation of female characters in that, but also just every line from the Mindy Project.
So good.
I think I've watched that show. That show has given me comfort in my worst moments so many times. I think I've watched it through at least 10 times, and that would be a conservative number. And the words that come out of her character's mouth, and also the love story, which I know is problematic, but it's based off Pride and Prejudice. Blame Jane Austen. You know what I mean? I think those are the moments that kind of stick out for me.
Maybe I won't get married, Maybe I'll do one of those eat, pray, love things. Ugh, no, I don't want to pray. Forget it. I'll just die alone.
I always repeat the line. It's just so dumb. But when she's like, I'm a petite Asian woman. Look how skinny my wrists are. I say that to everyone because I have really skinny wrists and no one sees my wrists like she does.
Yeah.
I can see your wrists.
Thank you.
They're very beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Just in case she didn't make it clear enough, I want to say again that Em was not trying to represent the views of all women of Indian descent. She was simply giving her own view and talking about her lived experience as a girl and a woman in the world where you don't see many faces that look like yours on screens and in the TV shows and movies that you watch. If you're interested in knowing a bit more, because I think it's important to also understand those other views, and maybe you want to read a little bit more about views that are different to Em's. So we've put some links to those in the show notes. I'm grateful to both Em and Laura for letting me steal them away from their work and for sharing all of their expertise and thoughts. This discussion was never about whether or not we should be cancelling Mindy Kaling. It's about exploring the idea of how people choose to represent their own culture in the wider popular culture. The biggest thing I took away is that we need more. We need more inclusion when it comes to these positions of power, and inclusion not just on things that you can see from the outside, but we want lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds and with lots of different life experiences so that they can all represent lots of different versions of their lives and their community. And that's the only way there won't be so much pressure on those who are the firsts to represent everyone. You can follow Emily on Instagram at Emily Vernem, and you can listen to Laura Brodnik on The Spill every day. Velma is streaming now on Binge if you want to see what all the fuss is about. And you can watch The Office just about anywhere. It's on Stan, Binge, Prime Video and 10play. The producer of No Filter is Emmeline Peterson. The executive producer is Elissa Ratliff, with sound production by Madeline Joannou. I'm Mia Freedman, and thank you so much for having me in your ears.